Hello, good morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Coffee with Dr. Childress. So I kind of have had a little rough night last night, so I'm feeling a little grumpy this morning. And I'm looking at a day of working in forensic custody evaluations. So if I seem a little distracted or a little grumpy, it's just Sunday morning. So today I thought I'd talk about treatment for the parents. I was thinking about what would you most like to know or hear about is probably treatment. You're not probably going to like what I say about treatment in the family courts right now, but I think that um, that's what most parents would probably want information on. How do we fix things? Talked a lot about how we diagnose it. How do we fix it? The other direction I was thinking of going is just into the current state of the family courts and professional psychology because it's changing around significantly. Just to briefly, the Gardnerian PAS folks from the 1980s, Burnett and Baker and all of that crew, Gottlieb, they're just headed into a brick wall. That there's no future in parental alienation, and this is part of the process of the pathology. The allies of the pathology have just been setting up parents. First, it gets you into parental alienation. You argue for 20, 40 years about this non existent pathology rather than just diagnose it. And then it takes it away from you ultimately at this point, where you're going to have no parental alienation experts are going to be authorized to testify in the courts under Cadence law. And the UN is slamming it, and it's just had its day. Even forensic psychology is abandoning parental alienation and creating their own new made-up pathology, resist refuse dynamic. No such thing. Um, and so when the other rats are leaving the sinking ship, that's an indication parental alienation has had its day. No one's going to suddenly say, "Oh, let's go back to 1985 and relook at Gardner's PAS." No, it's had a full look. It's not working. And so the fact that they've just went all in on that, they're heading into a brick wall, and they can't get back to Dr. Childress because the moment they acknowledge Dr. Childress, they acknowledge that why haven't you been doing this for the last 10 years? Support coming over and using established knowledge. So they're headed out. And then once they're gone, also they're my poster child for the false ally relative to the pathology. It's very interesting what happened. Forensic and um, the Gardner PAS experts are both flip sides of the same coin, the same conflict coin created by the pathology, by like unconscious processes from the pathology. But I don't want to talk about that. The other side was the forensic psychologists are getting hit by New York Blue Ribbon Commission, and that was pretty brutal on them. And it's accurate; they're right. And as um, legislatures and powers that be begin to look at forensic custody evaluations, they're massively flawed, massively unethical. Um, so it's going to be interesting, and they can't get back to Dr. Childress because the moment they start to apply knowledge, they basically admit they haven't been applying knowledge for the last 40 years in violation of the AP Ethics Code. And so all their big puffy vetoes from 20 years of I've been 20 years in the family courts actually becomes a bad thing because that's 20 years of misdiagnosis and incompetence. So the whole field of professional psychology in the family courts is churning, because that's really the only two groups you have in the family courts. The clinical psychologists, the actual treatment folks, left a long time ago because it's too dangerous to work in the family courts. So that's why I keep highlighting to people, not only do you have incompetence, but the people who came to the family courts are the worst imaginable. They're just here, to exploit you for financially. They don't have no idea what they're doing, and they most likely often collude and participate in the child abuse. I wouldn't say most likely, I'd say all the time. If you're misdiagnosing the pathology, you're colluding with child abuse because of your ignorance and incompetence and laziness. Attachment pathology, that's severe. When there's a severe attachment pathology, there's only one possible cause, which is child abuse by one parent or the other. Either the targeted parent's abusing the child, creating the child's attachment pathology towards that parent, or the allied parent is psychologically abusing the child by creating a false attachment pathology, a factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child, a shared persecutory delusion, a psychotic disorder. And so either the shared persecutory delusion and or factitious disorder both land you on a child psychological abuse diagnosis. So if you're involved in the family courts as a psychologist and you are not making a child protection recommendation, then you're participating in the child abuse one way or the other. Because I know for a fact on this type of pathology, there's child abuse, one parent or the other. So if you're not making a child protection recommendation, you've misdiagnosed it and you're not protecting the child. You're failing in your duty to protect obligations. So all the forensic psychologists, all of them, are participating in the child abuse and failing to protect the child. And none of them have experience, or none of them are competent in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders, persecutory delusions, which is what the pathology is. None of them are competent in the diagnostic assessment of that. So they are all in violation of standard 2.01 and 2.04, all of them. Ethical violations, failure to protect. So forensic psychology is going to be running into a buzzsaw, I think, as well, once they encounter reality. And so on the Gardner side, I kind of hold up Bill Burnett and Amy Baker, Jennifer Harmon, a couple others, Lorandos, as the poster child, the leaders of that group. And then over on the forensic side, I would put people like Dr. Deutsch or Droids or Sullivan, in the forensic psychology. But the forensic psychologists are just all the custody evaluators everywhere. So, and there's little groups of them in each location, each kind of incestuous little group of court-involved custody evaluators who often become the reunification therapists for each other. So one does custody evaluation, the other does the reunification therapy, and vice versa. And so let's talk about that. There's no such thing as reunification therapy. There's no such thing as parental alienation. There's no such thing as resist-fuse dynamic. These forensic mental health people in the family courts are the worst imaginable. They just make stuff up and they think they can, and they are lazy. They don't learn anything. They don't know anything. And so when you say, what do I do for treatment? Good luck. You have this, and that's where, as parents, you guys are really passive. And I'm kind of like trying to wake you up a little bit, that you're thinking and that's where the Gardner people help with it, that you have to prove something to somebody. We have to prove parental alienation to the DSM people so that it gets in. No, you don't. No, the diagnosis is already in the DSM-5. It's child psychological abuse or factitious disorder or delusional disorder. And in fact, before 2013, the shared delusional disorder was actually in the DSM-5. It was a shared psychotic disorder. So for all the way up to 2013, the diagnosis of a shared delusion was in the DSM system. But the Gardner, Burnett, and Baker, and all of those, whoosh, they're trying to get you to put parental alienation rather than just diagnosing what's in the DSM. And we could have had this 15, 20 years ago if they had properly diagnosed or accurately diagnosed the pathology. And that's a problem. And so that's what I came in and I diagnosed it, and they got a little upset. And this is their turf, so they're not going to play with Dr. Childress. And now they're running into a brick wall because they are just kind of disgusting humans and low-level professionals. I wouldn't even put them on a professional category at this point. They are a fringe group of humans in the family courts. And that's another thing. I don't see why people elevate these folks in the family courts, like Dr. Deutsch or Burnett or Jennifer Harmon or God forbid, Gene Mercer. You folks, it's like, holy cow, these are just random people who are just low level. At some point, I'm going to come back and do a Vita thing where I'll just go through these Vitas and take a look at them. These are not experts in anything. They're not even competent. And one of the reasons I start off my little treatment talk with this is to help ground you in reality of what surrounds you. Because our choice to getting treatment is to try to rehabilitate either the Gardnerian, some of the Gardnerian people, not the high level ones, they're lost, but some of the ones that have kind of been following after, and maybe if they want to come back to real knowledge, something like that. But mostly the Gardner people are just done for. They're irrelevant. And the forensic psychology people. And those are the ones that are working the family courts, and you're most likely encounter the reunification therapists. If somebody says they do reunification therapy, a mental health professional, run. Okay. They are that's snake oil. They're just selling you snake oil. They shouldn't be doing that. Psychologists should not be deceiving the client about what the therapy they're doing is. There is no such thing as reunification therapy. If somebody says that, say, "Oh, I'd so like to help and participate. That I think that's wonderful. I'm looking forward to my job. Can you provide me with a book I can read about reunification therapy so I can learn about it and help with that?" And then watch them. They won't ever provide you a book because there's no such thing. They just make it up. And what they'll say is, the child's not ready yet. And that's reunification therapy. I need to get the child ready, and just making stuff up. Just making stuff up. So I don't recommend you do that. Okay. One of my favorite sayings is, don't try to teach a pig to sing. It just frustrates you and annoys the pig. So I'm not going to recommend that you try to rehabilitate the current crop of forensic psychologists. So what do you do then? Well, it's critical, and I talk about that. It's critical that we move this out of the family courts and over into treatment. Family courts are way too expensive. They're way too long, and this isn't a custody issue. That's a false framing of the issue. The pathological parent wants to drive this into court to put you on trial for being a bad spouse parent. No, you want to move this off to treatment and then make them fight against treatment. That's what I did to the Gardner people. I moved it over um, to establish knowledge, and now they have to take a position against applying established knowledge. So yeah, they're actually recommending that other psychologists violate ethical standard 2.04. Let that sink in. Burnett and the other PAS experts are recommending that other psychologists violate standard 2.04 of the APA ethics code. That's something. They kind of put them in a bad position. And I did that by claiming the turf. I claimed established knowledge. They were going to fight with me because they fight about everything. They want to be expert. They're going to fight with me about it. And so now they're fighting against applying established knowledge. Do the same thing to your version of the pathogen. When you move it over to treatment, the pathological parent will then have to say, no, 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 we don't want treatment. We just want that parent gone from the child's life. And that exposes it. But also you have to plan ahead, because this pathology is very now reactive. It creates a lot of crises and a lot of chaos, disorganization. And then you get responding to that. Triggers you into your fears and insecurities, and so you're responding to the crisis of the day. And we need to get ahead of it. You need to get ahead of it. You need to be working about 6 months ahead, to where when you wind up getting there in 6 months, you're already at that point. You already have everything lined up, and you have and they're just arriving at that point. So planning ahead, develop a plan and then execute the plan. And that plan is to get it over to treatment. Now, as you're doing that through the court system, through getting court orders or getting rights to consent for treatment, that's always good. Rights to consent for treatment because the other parent's interfering with that. If you get sole consent rights for treatment, then you can ask your involved mental health professional to consult with me, and they will because you're the authorized person. If without that, they have to get consent from both parents to release information or talk and consult with the people who hold privilege or the ones who can consent. But if you hold sole consent, then you can bring me in as a consultant, and I can be sitting in any office, any session, anything. I look at this. Where are you? I'm in Seattle, so the internet's wonderful, and we do second opinion consults all the time in psychology. In fact, I just had kind of one. I have a foreign case, international case, and the psychologist over there, and I had a consultation regarding the matter. It was really nice and productive. So that's one way to move forward, and that's the best way is to bring me in as a consultant to the mental health people. Patients should not be explaining a pathology to the doctor. That is insane. When you have patients explaining pathology to the doctor, oh, that just indicates how absolutely bad things are over here. No, the doctor should already know. The doctor should be explaining it to you, not you. And so let's get this reestablished properly. So doctors should be explaining pathology to doctors. And if they have a problem with the explanation, we can talk about it, but doctors should be talking to doctors, not patients to doctors. But unfortunately, you do have to explain it to them. Now, the other option from working with the current group of unethical, incompetent, ignorant, lazy psychologists and trying to mold them into something is teach them. As a parent, you can maybe teach them how to do psychotherapy, maybe, hopefully. Rather than doing that, is to go out to actual clinical psychology, to where the knowledge actually is, and recruit them back to the family courts to work with your family in the situation. But they won't come. They'll say, no, I don't want to work in the family courts because it's too dangerous to their license. And they have every right to do that. As long as the court's going to make this dangerous to the psychologists who try to help, then the psychologists who help won't come to the family courts. We did not go to get our education for all those years to put our license on the line because of the games you're playing in the family courts with a very dangerous pathology, very psychotic, it's delusional, persecutory delusions, it's vengeful, it's retaliatory. No, 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 no. The clinical psychologists don't work in the family courts. That's why you have people like experts like Bessel van der Kolk and Tronick. Do they work in the family courts? No, no, never have. And yet they work with complex trauma attachment. We got complex trauma attachment in the family courts, and they have not even stepped foot in the forensic zone. You will not find a clinical psychologist over here, except me. And so you notice the difference between me and everybody else? That's the difference between what you have in the family courts and what's out there. What's out there is a lot of me's, but they won't come here. I didn't come here for my entire career. Look at my vita. I did not come to the family courts until I kind of was moving into semi-retirement, took one case here and said, holy cow. And I've been here ever since because I have duty to protect obligations. Soon as we start protecting the child, I'm probably going to move along and move on to the next interest area. But most likely I'll die in the family courts because you guys are moving so slow. The professionals are. But once it changes, it can change rapidly, but it's going to be chaotic rapid unless people listen to me. The diagnostic checklist and the parenting practices rating scale, that little assessment protocol, add the outcome measure of the parent-child relationship rating scale. Those measures are designed to help make that transition for all of you, for the mental health people, from the current state of abject ignorance and incompetence to the application of knowledge. And then ultimately, it's going to be leave Childress behind and go to Bowlby, go to Beck, go to Milan and Linehan and all of them, Minuch and Bowen. Go to the actual knowledge and apply that. Lyons Ruth, Carlin Lyons Ruth, in attachment, which works with Ed Tronick back on the East Coast. Excuse me. Her work is excellent around disorganized attachment stuff, but it's all attachment work. It hasn't been applied up and done stuff. So it's go out and get the knowledge and recruit back. So that's the barrier you face is no, they won't come back. So what's going to happen here as the forensic movement starts to collapse under things like the New York Commission, a Blue Ribbon Commission, and licensing boards start to become shamed. That's what I want you parents to do is just shame the licensing boards as to why they're not enforcing ethical standards for competence. So just keep hitting them with the same violations, 2.04, 2.01, 9.01 of the AP Ethics Code. They don't care about the facts of your case. They're not going to retry the case. But you keep hitting them with those two competence standards and that lead to the failure in the assessment standard, 9.01. And that failure in their duty to protect, they're not competent in the assessment of delusional thought disorders. You toss on the Walters and Friedlander quote that they should be. That's the pathology in the family. And make the licensing boards cover up for the violations over and over and over again. Licensing boards are supposed to be protecting the consumer from the incompetent mental health professional. Instead, what's developed in forensic psychology is the licensing boards are protecting the forensic psychologists from the consumer. So it's just all backwards. Where are why am I out here enforcing ethical standards of practice? Where are the licensing boards? So, excuse me. So basically, I'm just shaming the licensing board. So help me out. Continue, make them always, if licensing boards complaints are free when they're warranted, don't be retaliated. If they're warranted for the incompetence, you run into one of these ignorant, incompetent mental health people, the appropriate thing to do is to inform the licensing board about their incompetence. But the licensing board won't do anything. They never do anything because you pull the string. There's reasons why, but they won't do anything. But don't worry about it. You don't expect them to do it. Just get them to cover up more and more. And then the next act of parents will be to go to your state legislator and say, why aren't the licensing boards protecting my child? Why aren't they protecting me? Why aren't they requiring competence? That's their job of the licensing board, is to enforce standards of competence, but they're not doing it. Why not? Who oversees the licensing boards? The legislator who created them. So with all this Cadence law stuff and with all this stuff moving in the courts and fighting in UN and all this kind of stuff, toss on in. Where are the licensing boards? Why aren't they doing things? And see if you can get your legislators to start inquiring about that. The other thing you can do is get me to testify to people. Okay, I can't do that. I'm not as constituent of them, and if I go around saying, I want to testify, and they're going to say, no, who are you? Okay, but if they get thousands of emails saying, you need to have Dr. Childress testify, then maybe they'll send me an invitation. I'll testify, and oh, yay, good. So I've done what I've done, or what I could do. I'm a lone clinical psychologist in private practice. Okay, if you want this change, you have to take the information I've given you and actualize it and use it. Don't try to prove something to somebody. Expect competence. Expect them to protect your child. Expect them to do their job and hold them accountable when they don't. That's what I've given you as the standards for accountability. 2.01, 2.01, 9.01. Hold them accountable to real knowledge and to the application to that and to the solution to that. If you want to build a patio, and you hire a contractor to build you a patio, they take your money and say, yeah, I'll build you a patio, but then never build you a patio. That's called fraud. If they do it over and over and over again to a lot of people, they take their money to build a patio and they never build a patio. That's fraud. And the board, construction board, or whoever, state consumer protection agency should come in and sanction the license of that contractor for taking people's money. And these mental health people say their job is to fix the pathology in your family. Okay, that's the treatment, diagnosis and treatment. Identify the problem and fix it. They're doctors. And they keep taking everybody's money and never fixing anything. It's just massive fraud in the family courts. Just massive. So how do you get away from that? First thing, there should always be outcome measures. So that parent-child relationship rating scale, it's up on my website, but it's really simple. 1 to 7 rating scale. From 1 to 2s are awful, 6 and 7s are wonderful, 3, 4, 5 is normal range on affection, cooperation, social involvement. 3 numbers. Every day, the targeted parent rates that for their child and sends those 3 numbers to the family therapist, puts in an Excel file, and tracks the child's symptoms. Affection, cooperation, social involvement, a 1 to 7 Likert scale. That should happen routinely in all therapy. So if it's not happening, just start completing those parenting practices rating scale. It's on the mental health consultation page of my website, consulting website. So just grab that, or you don't even have to form, just the 3 numbers, 1 to 7, affection, cooperation, social involvement, and send them, email them to the therapist. Therapist says, I don't know what to do with it. Well, because they're incompetent, they should already have an outcome measure. First question I always ask when I encounter treatment is, what's your outcome measure? And they say none. And I say, well, how do you know what you're doing is effective? How do you know when you're finished? What? It's like, oh, yeah. Google mental health treatment plans and read the top 2 returns. I don't care what they are. Just read the top 2 returns. Google WikiHow mental health treatment plans and read their 13 things about a mental health treatment plan. Outcome. There's goals in specified measurable ways, interventions for each goal, timeframes, estimated timeframes for goal accomplishment or for benchmark accomplishment, and outcome measures to measure treatment progress and goal accomplishment. All treatment plans have those 4 pieces, plus your signature on them, informed consent. I bet you have none of them. Okay, I bet you've never seen a treatment plan in the family courts. To give you an indication of how common a treatment plan is and what they look like, kind of, go over to your school system and their IEP, individual education plan. That's a treatment plan. It has goals specified in measurable ways, interventions for each goal, estimated timeframes for goal accomplishment, and outcome measures to measure progress and goal accomplishment. There's your treatment plan. IEPs, and they are done routinely in the school system, and you have never seen one in the family courts. Holy cow. The family courts are sub public schools. And the importance of the decisions being made by the judges, and they are getting professional services substandard to what's given in the public schools just routinely. Public schools are required to do a functional behavioral analysis before they can put a behavior plan in the classroom. It's required. A functional behavioral analysis is a version of an applied behavioral analysis. The forensic psychologists don't even know how to do one. They're like, if you put the public schools on a 1 to 100 scale, you put the services in the public schools, let's say at 20 on a 1 to 100 scale, forensic psychologists is like negative 70. They're just like way below the school system. And you tolerate that because you don't know better, basically. You think that's, they're psychologists. No, these are the worst of the worst of the worst, just really, really bad. And once that becomes known, then all the cover up of that for 40 years will be exposed. And oh my goodness, a scandal, and it's a whole bunch of stuff coming. But that's why nothing's changing, because the moment they acknowledge the problem, it means it has implications for them not acknowledging it before and them feeding off of you. And so people like the existing forensic psychologists and the existing PAS people are shame is coming, and they're the poster children of um, countertransference and collusive pathology. So, getting out, you're still stuck though in all this chaos and incompetence and everything. You're stuck because you have a child and you need to protect your child. First thing you need to do is get an accurate diagnosis. Diagnosis guides treatment. And so that's the focus. We need to get that child abuse diagnosis. And it can come from persecutory delusion, factitious disorder. It can come just from the backbone of the psychologist. If they say it's child abuse, they have a license, it's child abuse, psychological child abuse. They just don't stand up and protect your child. And so I'm using the delusional disorder and factitious disorder to give a baseline and I can leverage to hold them accountable if they don't. But you don't actually need those. You just need the child psychological abuse diagnosis if the psychologist is willing to step up and make that diagnosis. And they should. They have obligations to protect the child from child abuse and you from spousal abuse using the child as a weapon. That's their duty, a legally obligating duty to protect. So, in addition to licensing boards, if you can afford it and you're in a position to do this, a malpractice lawsuit it would be, in my mind, reasonable for their ignorance, incompetence, and failure in the duty to protect. We need to get standards back in the family courts. And so let's start with the standards of the APA Ethics Code. Mandatory required standards. Let's get those to start. Let's just get back to the APA Ethics Code. Boop, rise it up to there. We won't stop there. We'll keep going higher than that. We'll go way up and get really high quality services here. But we're going to start with just getting some basic foundation of ethical standards. The APA Ethics Code, mandatory required. Let's make sure that's being addressed and followed by the psychologist. So you're going to need to get that diagnosis, but I'll talk about that and have talked about in other situations. I think you should get the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting and the parenting practices rating scale routinely completed by all mental health professionals. Ask them to do it. Now, if they say no, that's a big red sign that they're not competent. Be careful. They may retaliate against you. A few years ago, when I suggested parents did that, I was getting feedback that when they did, the psychologist would retaliate against them and write bad reports to the court and do stuff because they were asking for the child's symptoms stuff. So be careful. But now as things are a little bit more advanced, I'm deeper into the court systems now, so potentially I could protect against retaliation. But that's really bad when the mental health people are dangerous to their patients and will retaliate against patients if they require or they seek competence from their mental health people. It is so bad in the family courts, the mental health people. Whoa. Once you turn over the rock, things are happening. ProPublica is coming through with their pieces on Harmon and Gottlieb. Good. Gottlieb's that's a mess of a program she created. And Harmon is really problematic in her research kind of stuff. And once you overturn these rocks, all sorts of creepy crawly things are going to come running out. But no one's overturning the rocks yet. All the APA, AFCC licensing boards are all covering up because pull the string, find out why. The essential reason is because they're covering up for themselves. The people in the APA who are in charge are the forensic psychology people. And there's specific people who are, in the committees on the APA and doing all of this stuff. And so they're covering up for themselves because the moment they say, oh, it's unethical, well, that's what they're doing. And so, so the licensing boards are covering up. APA is covering up. AFCC is covering up. And I think there's a class action lawsuit there, but I'm not an attorney. But dang, it seems like you're a class of people, and it seems like there's a systematic effort to fleece you of your money and solve nothing by giving you a special class of psychologists that you must use and driving away the other treatment psychologists who would actually fix things. I think you've been screwed, and systemically screwed in an effort to exploit you financially and sap you of your money, systemically by the AFCC as an organizing sponsoring organization, and the APA who colludes with it and supports that and gives its imprimatur of credibility to forensics custody evaluations and stuff that are unethical and awful. So I need to start wrapping things up here, um, but I haven't talked about treatment, except the bad aspects of it. And so, because I want to clue you in as what I'm recommending you do, you need to get back out to the real people and get them back. Now, most of them won't come back. The two places I'm going to recommend you go are to the psychologists who are tougher. They're trauma psychologists. They're not afraid. They won't be afraid to come back to the family courts. Okay. If they can bring their knowledge with them. And yes, absolutely. Please bring your knowledge. That's exactly what we want. This isn't custody, it's treatment. They can always consult with me, especially if you're talking to them early and they're not necessarily involved and they want to know what their role is. Well, you can hook them up with me. I'm scheduling on my consulting website. Um, and as long as they don't disclose confidential information, psychologists, we can consult. We're doctors, we can consult all the time. And I can explain to them what we're needing. We are needing that diagnosis and the treatment. The two groups I'm going to recommend that you turn to are for men. For the targeted parent males, I suggest you get to the dialectic behavior therapist, DBT Marshall Linehan. And that's for the treatment of borderline personality pathology. They don't work in the family courts. They don't know how to do attachment treatment and a lot of stuff. So they're not fully competent with this pathology. And so though they should stay away because they're not competent. But they need to come back because we don't have anybody even close. And so there's an ethical standard a little bit lower down that says if you're not competent, you can still do this. If the alternative is to deny services, but you should consult with somebody. So that's what I would serve as sort of the conduit to help them make that transition. The advantage of the DBT therapists are couple. It's a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's one of the basic fundamental schools of psychotherapy. It's probably the predominant one right now that's being used, CBT. And the cognitive aspect of that, Aaron Beck, will be helpful in addressing the child's irrational beliefs, helping the child kind of the delusional thoughts, helping get rid of those and come back to more grounded belief system. That's the cognitive aspect of CBT. The behavioral aspect will bring in applied behavioral analysis. And with applied behavioral analysis, if you do that, you can identify authentic from inauthentic conflict because the cue structure is all messed up. So applied behavioral analysis, behavior chain interviewing will help identify authentic from inauthentic conflict. Basically, you look at interaction sequences or problematic sequences. You start before, then you go to during, then you go to after, looking at thoughts, feelings, and actions. So, what were you doing before? What were you thinking? What were you doing? What were you feeling? Then what happened? And you walk through it step by and what were you thinking, doing, feeling, and then what happened afterwards, thinking, doing, feeling, and you can get a clear understanding, precise understanding for what the cues and reinforcers and everything are. So the CBT component will bring valuable knowledge. In addition, it adds mindfulness from like the Eastern meditative traditions. That's wonderful for helping the stress reduction of the child and the parent. So stress reduction on the mindfulness, but also helping the child discover their own authenticity. We have an invalidating environment, imposed delusional disorder. So the treatment's going to have to be helping the child develop self-authenticity. How did the child know what the child actually feels? The mindfulness skills will help with that. So I recommend dialectic behavior therapy. In addition, because the DBT knows the borderline, they will recognize this version of the pathology, a borderline mother version of the pathology. Um, and they're familiar, borderlines will collapse into persecutory delusions, and they're kind of familiar with that and all the chaos and abandonment fears and role reversal and all the pathology of the borderline. What they won't be familiar with is how to fix the attachment pathology between the parent and child. But I can help scaffold them on that. It doesn't take much, and because they're coming in with a baseline of knowledge, we need to add a little bit of family systems. We need to add a little bit of attachment pathology. Solution focused is good to add to that DBT as well. So if they bring their DBT back, adapt it to the family courts, get an outcome measure on it, and then I can explain more about how the therapy works at some future time. For the targeted parent moms, I'm recommend you get over to the domestic violence therapist. That's intimate partner violence. That's a professional term for that. So you want to find intimate partner violence therapist, IPV, domestic violence. You can call up the local hotline and say, Dr. Childress is recommending I look into IPV or domestic violence. It's spousal, emotional, and psychological abuse using the child as a weapon. So that's your presentation. That's what you tell. And the reason you want the IPV therapist is because they're familiar with the narcissistic dads. And so they'll recognize a narcissistic dad pattern that's you're kind of involved in, of weaponizing the child and using the child. And they are used to protection. They're working spousal abuse. They're used to standing up and protecting people, protecting women, the spouses, and their children. I used to work in that domain. And so they're not afraid. They're trauma informed. And when it comes to protection, they'll stand up. So get them back. But now, again, they won't work in the family courts. They don't know the family courts. They don't know attachment pathology. They don't know, a lot of this stuff, family systems maybe. So they'll also benefit from a little scaffolding. But again, if they just hop on, schedule a time with me and we talk, and you'll have to pay for my time and their time. But if they get on and schedule a time for me to talk, I can help orient them. It's not a major adjustment. They're pretty close. But we need to get clinical psychology back in the family courts fundamentally. And unfortunately, that's kind of, you're the point person on that. 10 years from now, they'll all be back. And the families will coming in, we'll all have, early intervention and all this wonderful, great stuff. But right now, we need to construct that. We need to go from the chaos and exploitation and child abuse, collusion with child abuse of professional psychology for the last 40 years, and the absolute ignorance and incompetence and unethical practice and cover up, the nightmare. We need to get back to standards and real psychology, integrate your families back into clinical psychology. To do that, we have to make it safe for the clinical psychologist. That's my job, what I'm doing right now. I'm essentially trying to make it safe for them by walk where I walk, step where I step, and you'll avoid all the landmines over here. We're treatment, not custody. Stay maintained in your role. So I'm kind of like your first in. And if they follow me, it'll be safe. So that's your kind of treatment situation right now. You need to get that diagnosis, focus on the diagnosis. And it's just individual psychologists and individual people who will be willing to step up and do the right thing. Now, it's because it's dangerous, they're going to be scared for their license or for various other things. Your ex is very retaliatory, very dangerous. And, licensing boards and all sorts of things. That's where getting support. That's where Dr. Childress is a second opinion consultation. I have lots of knowledge. And so if there's a problem, let it come over to me. And the involved mental health person can say, I'm listening to Dr. Childress and I agree with that. And I'm doing, this is child psychological abuse diagnosis. If you disagree with that, talk to Dr. Childress. And then call me in as a testifying expert witness for just a little pocket thing to support the mental health person who cites me as support for their child abuse diagnosis. And saying, I agree with Dr. Childress. This is a persecutory delusion. I filled out his forms. This is child psychological abuse. Then the other parent in the litigation says, "Oh, that's incompetent and everything." And then you bring in and say, "Dr. Childress, what are you talking about? Your therapist is just," and let me do the defense of them. And that makes it safe for your psychologist. We should always be going in as twos on this. And we can do that because of the internet and telehealth. It's so easy. Where are you? I'm in Seattle. Look how easy it is. I can be in any assessment session. I can be in any treatment session with the proper authorizations. Second opinion. If you want to get a third psychologist in, great. Let's get a third psychologist, 2 in telehealth, 1 in the room. We can all have a 3-psychologist party and come up with a diagnosis and treatment plan, consensus. If you got 3 psychologists on a situation, you're going to get a good, there might be a dissenting opinion, but the judge can look at that. They're totally familiar with 3-court appellate panels and, majority decision, dissenting opinion. So judges can handle that. In all cases of possible child abuse, our diagnosis has to be accurate 100% of the time, because the consequences for misdiagnosing child abuse are simply too severe for the child. Our diagnosis has to be accurate 100% of the time. Mine is, and there's ways to ensure that it is. If I don't know, I say I don't know, identify the information I do need in order to know, and then I collect that information. There's various things, response to intervention that we can do. If treatment doesn't work, let me end with this little nugget. If treatment fails, if it doesn't work, there's only 2 possible explanations. Either A, it's misdiagnosis and you're treating cancer with insulin, or B, the diagnosis is accurate, but you're incompetent in the delivery of the treatment for that diagnosis. Because if your diagnosis is accurate and you're competent in delivering the treatment for that diagnosis, then the treatment will be effective. So if the treatment's not effective, one of those 2 things is wrong. Either your diagnosis is wrong or you're not competent in the treatment. Now, mostly I'll assume that these mental health people are relatively competent in their treatments. That means they've misdiagnosed the pathology. Exactly. This is child abuse. There's 4 diagnoses of child abuse: physical, sexual, neglect, psychological. Switch categories. If my child, or if the child is being beaten with electrical cords by a parent, and I'm trying to do therapy for that child for their aggressive behavior or something, no therapy of mine will be effective as long as I send that child home to be beaten with electrical cords. If I have a child who's being sexually abused by her stepdad, no therapy of mine will be effective as long as I send the child home to be continued to be sexually abused by the stepdad. Therapy will not work for child abuse, will not work when the child is being abused. Our first treatment intervention for child abuse is to protect the child. The moment we protectively separate the child from the abusive parent, now we can do treatment that's effective for the consequences of the child abuse, because the child's no longer being actively abused. Then once we recover the child's normal and healthy development, we restore contact with the abusive parent with safeguards in place to make sure the abuse does not resume. And the safeguards are going to include that outcome rating scale: affection, cooperation, social involvement, daily ratings by the targeted parent. As long as the child stays normal range, we know the child is not being psychologically abused or is not collapsing to the psychological abuse. They're handling it okay. We'll be teaching the child ways to handle the problematic parent. But as long as they stay normal range, they're communicating, they're handling it okay. If they drop to 1s and 2s, those are the symptoms of child abuse. We know the child abuse is resumed. So the outcome measure is critical for detecting relapse when we reach that point. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up on my treatment. I went over today. I'm trying to hold these down to about half an hour, but there's just so much information that's moving through right now. So if if for some reason, targeted moms, you can't find an IPV therapist, then look over to the dialectic behavior therapist. The other domain that we to bring in, so we have the therapy for the personality disorders. That's the DBT or the IPV, intimate partner violence therapist. I suggest you put them as a family therapist. But the other domains of knowledge to be applied are family systems, Mnuchin, Bowen, Haley, Madonis, primarily Mnuchin, Bowen would get you most all the information, and the attachment pathologies. That's Tronick and Gold, their book, The Power of Discord, and Sue Johnson's Emotionally Focused Therapy. EFT, emotionally focused therapy, is too gentle for the personality pathology of the family courts and the child abuse pathology, but it's a good add-on. Understanding the principles of EFT and bringing them into kind of dialectic behavior therapy and kind of creating a synthesis would be useful. So Tronick and Johnson hold the attachment knowledge. Mnuchin, Bowen hold the family systems knowledge. There's also Schwartz, internal family systems therapy. It's a combination of family systems and Gestalt therapy. And so that's another, if you can't find what you're looking for, you're looking around, internal family systems therapy, family, Mnuchin, Bowen. I'm also looking at this other one just now, attachment-based family therapy, theory, clinical model outcomes, and process research. What's the journal? Journal of Affective Disorders. It's from 2021, so it's relatively recent, which makes me feel good. It's like, did I miss something? Oh no, it's only a couple of years ago this back came out. And it's from Diamond at Drexel, Diamond at Ben Gurion, and Levy at Drexel. So we got Ben Gurion University, so we got a little international flavor on this. And because it's family systems and combining attachment, this is going to be very useful. The piece it's missing is the personality disorder pathology, which is an attachment pathology all grown up. So they're interrelated, and it's as I was looking at it, it's got solid empirical support for it. So these are the type of things, rather than reunification therapy or me coming up with my own therapy, or no, turn to established knowledge and bring this in. It just takes a little bit of adaptation because these people haven't been in the family courts. They've abandoned you. That's a patient abandonment. You've been abandoned by the APA and all psychologists and given the worst possible psychologists ever in a passive aggressive thing because your families are dangerous. And the psychologist went, well, we don't care about you. Here, take these. We give you the worst possible. And then we go off and and we're developing therapies and for everybody else except you in the family courts. I don't know why that's not a class action lawsuit. Holy cow, you can't get your lawyers to figure that out. ACLU, you cannot. ACLU with the Blue Ribbon Commission from New York, and you're telling me the ACLU and Dr. Childress, well, everything I've given you, cannot come up with a class action lawsuit on this? And you don't even have to win it. Just bringing it with the APA and AFCC as defendants, just bringing a class action lawsuit would rattle their cage and give you social media would be here, CNN looking at a class action lawsuit from parents in the family court, naming the APA. Do you need to win it? No, it can even get thrown out. It doesn't matter. I think you got a case though. I'm a psychologist. I'm not an attorney. Thank God. I think about that from time to time. I'm not an attorney. Whew. So with that, I'm going to head off to my Sunday of forensic custody evaluations line by line. So pity me on my Sunday. And with that, we'll talk to you later. We'll see you next Sunday for coffee. Good luck, everybody out there. And don't let the pathology captivate you. Develop your plan, do what you can do, and then when you've done what you can do, go do something else and get back to your life. Don't let this pathology kind of capture. We're going to be working it out. You're doing what you can do in this situation, and just stay focused. Don't trigger into your fears. All righty, we'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye bye.